Evan stood in front of the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest. The warm sunlight beamed down on him, but it didn't feel warm at all. His fingers trembled slightly as he adjusted the small, sleek, solar-powered airplane that sat before him. It was no ordinary model. This was the culmination of years of work, experimentation, and sleepless nights. He had built it himself, designed it, engineered it, and after many failed attempts, finally made it fly. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was a sunny Saturday afternoon at the local science fair, a modest event that usually attracted a handful of parents, students, and science enthusiasts. But today, there was something different. Today, there was a buzz in the air that Evan couldn't quite explain. People were staring at his invention, murmuring to one another, taking videos. This wasn't just any plane. This was Evan's solar-powered airplane. A child's dream that had somehow turned into a reality. A dream that could change the world. The crowd was thickening as the clock ticked down to the moment of truth. Evan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. At just 10 years old, he was still the shy kid who always kept his nose buried in books about aerodynamics, renewable energy, and solar power. But today, he wasn't just another quiet kid. Today, he was about to prove something. Something far bigger than a simple science project. Then, as the final seconds before launch ticked away, the door at the back of the event hall opened. There, standing at the entrance, was none other than Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla and SpaceX, a tech mogul whose vision for a sustainable future had inspired millions, had entered the room. His presence sent ripples through the crowd. People gasped, some even whispered in disbelief. Evan's stomach dropped. Of all the places he could be, of all the times to be seen, Elon Musk had chosen this moment to walk into the science fair. It was as if the universe had conspired to throw the ultimate challenge in his path. Elon Musk, the man who had revolutionized electric cars, the man who was planning to take humanity to Mars, the man whose very name had become synonymous with innovation. And here he was, in the same room as Evan, looking directly at the small plane that had cost the boy everything to create. Evan swallowed hard. This wasn't just a dream. This was the moment where the world would either recognize him for what he was, an inventor, or dismiss him as just another kid with an idea. He had built this airplane from scratch, powered only by the energy of the sun. But would it work? Would it fly? And, more importantly, would Elon Musk believe in him? The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. The plane's engines hummed to life. The audience held its breath as the airplane slowly lifted off the ground. A collective gasp echoed through the room as Evan's creation soared into the air. It was a perfect flight, smooth, steady, and most importantly, powered by nothing but sunlight. As the plane climbed higher, Evan's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. He had done it. But then, just as the plane reached its peak height and began to circle above, a voice broke through the air. "That's impressive, kid," Elon Musk's voice boomed from the back of the room. "But let's see how long it lasts." Evan's eyes snapped to where Elon stood. A small crowd of people now gathered around him. Was that a challenge? Or was it just an observation? Evan wasn't sure, but in that moment, something shifted. He wasn't just flying a plane anymore. He was about to face the ultimate test, the man who had made history in the world of innovation. And he had no idea what would come next. The plane continued to soar, and Evan knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. Evan's fingers still trembled as he watched his solar-powered airplane circle above, gliding gracefully against the backdrop of a bright blue sky. The cheers of the audience echoed in his ears, but his mind was elsewhere. His eyes were fixed on Elon Musk, who stood quietly, observing the plane's every move. Evan didn't know what to feel. Pride, fear, or awe. But one thing was for certain. This moment would define everything. He had spent the past 2 years of his life working toward this. 2 years of relentless trial and error, of late nights spent in his garage with a soldering iron and a stack of textbooks. Yet, his journey had begun long before that. It had started when he was just a small child, long before the airplane, long before the science fair. Evan was never one to play with toys like other kids. While most of his classmates were outside, riding bikes or playing video games, Evan was inside, hunched over his makeshift workspace, creating things. From the time he could walk, his parents had noticed his fascination with machines. His first toy wasn't a doll or a stuffed bear. It was a broken-down remote control car he found at a yard sale. Instead of seeing a useless pile of plastic and wires, Evan saw an opportunity. He took it apart, figured out how it worked, and put it back together. By the time he was 6, he could build simple circuits and mechanical toys from scratch. His parents, Lily and Mark, were supportive of his interests but didn't have the resources to truly nurture them. Mark was a mechanic who worked long hours, and Lily was a schoolteacher, often too busy to help Evan with his projects. But they did their best, offering encouragement and occasionally picking up spare parts or old gadgets they found at garage sales. It was their belief in him, their endless support, that kept Evan going through the difficult moments, the moments when the parts didn't fit or the project didn't work. The spark that led Evan to his solar-powered airplane came a few years ago when he first heard about solar energy in a class at school. He was fascinated by the idea that the sun, something so vast and powerful, could be harnessed to power machines, cars, even cities. The idea of renewable energy thrilled him. He read everything he could about solar panels, about the physics behind them, and about how they could change the world. He imagined a future where fossil fuels were no longer needed, where machines were powered by the very thing that gave life to Earth. His fascination quickly turned into obsession. Evan began experimenting with solar panels. He would visit local electronics shops, asking for discarded panels or old batteries, and over time, he started learning how to integrate them into his projects. It wasn't easy. There were days when the panels didn't work, or when he accidentally overcharged a battery and watched it burn up in smoke. There were nights when he had to sleep on the floor of his garage, surrounded by tools, wires, and broken gadgets. But Evan didn't care. Every failure only fueled his drive. He knew that one day, it would all come together. And then it did. When Evan was 9 years old, he got his first real breakthrough. After months of research, design sketches, and trial and error, he built the first prototype of his solar-powered airplane. It wasn't much, a small, lightweight frame with solar panels glued to the wings, a basic motor, and a simple battery. But it worked. Just barely. The plane took off in his backyard, shakily at first, but it flew. That flight, short as it was, changed everything for Evan. It was proof that his idea could work. The spark of a dream had become a reality, and for the first time, he felt like he was onto something bigger than himself. This was more than just a science fair project. This was the beginning of a future he could shape. He continued to improve the design over the next year, learning more about aerodynamics and energy efficiency. Each failure taught him something new, and each success gave him the motivation to push further. By the time he was 10, Evan's solar-powered airplane was ready for its first public demonstration. He didn't know if anyone would believe in him, or if the plane would even work when he flew it for the first time in front of a crowd. But as he stood there at the science fair, the world watching, Evan realized that it didn't matter. He had already accomplished something incredible. He had built it. It was his creation, and that was enough. Evan's mother, Lily, was his rock throughout this journey. While Mark, his father, was always a bit more skeptical about Evan's unconventional interests, Lily supported him wholeheartedly. She believed in his potential, even when no one else did. She would always say, "Remember, Evan, it's not about how many times you fail. It's about how many times you get back up and try again. You're a thinker. You'll figure it out." Lily had always been the practical one, encouraging Evan to keep learning and pushing his limits. But she also understood the importance of nurturing his curiosity. She spent countless hours helping him organize his notes, proofread his research papers, and ensure he had the materials he needed. She even drove him across the city to attend local science fairs and competitions, always believing that one day, her son's brilliance would be recognized. On the other hand, Evan's father, Mark, was more practical. He didn't completely understand his son's obsession with airplanes and solar panels, but he appreciated Evan's work ethic. He wasn't the type to give his son empty praise. Instead, he pushed Evan to always do better, to keep learning and improving, and to never settle for good enough. "Look, kid," Mark would say when Evan showed him a new invention. That's a good start, but don't think you're done. There's always something better out there. Keep working. Mark's words were harsh sometimes, but they lit a fire under Evan. It was tough love, but it made Evan more determined to prove himself. And now, standing at the science fair with his solar-powered airplane soaring above him, Evan realized that his father's lessons had paid off. He wasn't just a kid with a dream. He was an inventor, an innovator, a creator of things that could change the world. As Evan stood there, watching the plane soar through the air, a new thought entered his mind. If his plane could attract Elon Musk's attention, maybe, just maybe, his dream of changing the world was closer than ever. The presence of Musk was more than just an opportunity. It was a challenge that would test Evan in ways he never expected. And with the crowd watching and his heart racing, Evan knew that this was just the beginning. The crowd had barely begun to settle when Evan heard a voice cut through the air, its tone both smooth and probing. "That's impressive, kid," Elon Musk said, his eyes fixed on the small airplane as it continued to soar in the sky. "But let's see how long it lasts." For a brief moment, Evan's world seemed to freeze. The cheering around him faded. The whirring of the airplane's tiny engine became distant. His eyes locked on the man who had made history with electric cars and space travel. Elon Musk, standing across the room, arms folded, watching the little plane like a hawk. Evan's heart skipped a beat. Had Elon just challenged him? He wasn't sure what to feel. Part of him wanted to burst with excitement. This was Elon Musk, the very person who had inspired him to dream bigger, think harder, and aim higher. But another part of him felt a knot form in his stomach. Musk's words weren't meant as praise. They were a challenge. The question was no longer whether the plane could fly. The question was, could it last? The air felt heavier now. The excitement that had once filled Evan with pride now seemed like a distant echo. His plane had worked so far, but could it handle the pressure of being under Elon Musk's scrutiny? Evan's thoughts raced. He had designed the plane with efficiency in mind. Solar panels that powered a lightweight motor, a frame made from durable yet inexpensive materials, and a battery capable of storing enough energy to keep the plane flying for several minutes. But Evan knew that a few minutes in the air wasn't enough to prove his point, not with someone like Musk watching. He swallowed, forcing himself to focus. The plane was still in the air, flying steadily, its solar panels glinting in the sunlight. He had built it. He had tested it. But would it survive the test Musk had just laid out for him? For a moment, he looked out at the crowd, noticing their expectant eyes. They were waiting, all of them. They didn't know what was at stake, but Evan did. This wasn't just a science project anymore. This was a test of everything he'd worked for, the culmination of his entire journey. His palms began to sweat, but Evan steeled himself. He had worked too hard to let a single moment of doubt break him now. Seconds passed like hours as the plane continued its slow, steady arc in the air. It was beautiful, Evan thought. The way the sunlight reflected off the solar panels, the way it soared with such grace. But then, a slight flicker. A tiny dip in altitude. Evan's breath hitched. Was it starting to lose power? No, not now. The plane struggled for a moment, then steadied itself. Evan felt a wave of relief. But the airplane wasn't the only thing in danger of losing control. Elon Musk walked slowly toward Evan, his eyes never leaving the plane. Evan had read a lot about Musk. His ability to see through problems, his relentless drive to push technology beyond its limits. He didn't know if Musk saw him as just another child with a small project, or if he recognized the potential in Evan's invention. "Interesting design," Musk said, pausing a few feet away from Evan, still watching the plane. "But it's going to need more than a couple of solar panels and a lightweight frame if it's going to change the world. You've got to think bigger, kid. You've got to think about the bigger picture." Evan looked up at Musk, trying to process his words. Think bigger? He was already thinking big. The whole point of the plane was to use renewable energy, to move away from fossil fuels, to prove that kids, people, could create sustainable technology. But did Musk think Evan's vision wasn't big enough? "I've seen a lot of projects like this," Musk continued. "They work for a while, but they never last. They never go far enough. You'll need a breakthrough if you want to make an impact." His voice was calm, But the words felt like a punch to Evan's gut. "Don't get me wrong," Musk added, his tone softening a little. "You're on the right path. You just need to think about how to scale it up. Take it further. What's the next step?" Evan blinked, his mind racing. He had always thought big. But maybe he wasn't thinking big enough. The plane wavered again, just as Evan was about to answer Musk. This time, there was no recovering. The plane dipped once more, its wings shaking as if struggling to stay aloft. It hovered for a split second before it began to descend. Slowly, gracefully almost, as if it knew its time was up. The crowd gasped. The plane glided down, touching the ground gently but softly, its wings skimming the grass as it came to a stop. Evan's heart sank. He had failed. The airplane, which had flown so gracefully earlier, now lay still on the ground. His stomach twisted with frustration. He had worked for months, years even, and now it had all come to an end in front of a crowd. Worse yet, in front of Elon Musk, who had just delivered the hardest challenge of Evan's young life. But there was more to it than just failure. Musk's words rang in his ears. "You've got to think bigger." Evan took a deep breath, pushing the knot in his throat down. The plane hadn't lasted as long as he'd hoped, but that didn't mean it was over. This wasn't the end. This was just another challenge. Another opportunity to get back up and try again. Evan walked toward the plane, his legs feeling heavy, as if every step was weighed down by the expectations of the crowd and his own self-doubt. He knelt beside the airplane and gently touched the wing. There was a brief silence before anyone spoke. Finally, Elon Musk approached him, his voice softer now, almost encouraging. "Don't worry about it, kid. You've got something here. Just don't stop. Keep going. I see potential in what you've built. You're close." The words weren't a perfect salve to Evan's wounded pride, but they were enough to spark something deep inside him. A new determination. Evan nodded, silently thanking Musk. Then, he turned to face the crowd. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The days that followed the science fair were a blur. Evan's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: pride, doubt, hope, and frustration. The sound of Musk's voice kept echoing in his head. Think bigger. He couldn't stop replaying the moment in the hangar, when his solar-powered airplane had failed to keep flying. The rush of excitement that had once surged through his veins now felt like a distant memory. Instead, a cold emptiness settled in, one that came with the crushing realization that the world, or at least the man he admired most, had seen his limitations. He spent the next few days locked in his room, surrounded by blueprints, gadgets, and broken pieces of old electronics. He would tinker with the plane, trying to fix what had gone wrong. But deep down, Evan knew the problem wasn't just with the plane. It was with his thinking. Musk was right. He needed to think bigger. But how? How could a 10-year-old, with limited resources, change the world the way Musk had? How could he overcome the impossible challenges that lay ahead? On the fourth day after the science fair, Evan had a moment of clarity. Sitting at his desk, scribbling ideas for improvements to the plane's design, his mind suddenly exploded with possibilities. What if the solar panels weren't the only source of power? What if he could build a hybrid system? Solar panels for the day, and a small wind turbine to recharge the battery overnight. He grabbed a notebook and began sketching furiously. The wind turbine idea could be the breakthrough he needed. It could increase the airplane's range, give it more endurance, and allow it to stay in the air longer. But there was one huge problem. Evan had no idea how to build a wind turbine, let alone integrate it into his existing plane design. But Evan wasn't the kind of kid who shied away from a challenge. Instead of shrinking from it, he saw it as an opportunity to learn. And so, he threw himself into research, devouring everything he could find about wind turbines, renewable energy, and hybrid propulsion systems. By the end of the week, he had a plan. Evan knew that taking on something this big would require more than just his knowledge. He would need help, someone who could guide him through the more advanced engineering concepts. He needed someone with experience, someone who believed in him. And that's when he remembered Dr. Linda Brooks, a family friend who worked as an aerospace engineer at a local company. Dr. Brooks had always been kind to Evan, and her enthusiasm for engineering had sparked his own curiosity years ago. She was the one who had first introduced him to the idea of aerodynamics and energy-efficient flight. Evan knew that if anyone could help him turn his idea into something real, it would be her. He hesitated at first. He wasn't sure if she would take him seriously. A 10-year-old kid, asking for help on a project that was likely to fail. But when Evan called her up, her voice was warm and encouraging, just like it had always been. "Evan, you've got a passion for this. I believe in you," she had said. "Come by my office tomorrow, and let's talk." The next day, Evan made his way to Dr. Brooks' office. As he entered the building, his nerves were on edge. This wasn't just a casual conversation. This was his future, the opportunity to take his dream and turn it into something tangible. Dr. Brooks greeted him with a warm smile. She was tall, with short, silver-gray hair, and an infectious enthusiasm that made her seem more like a mentor than an engineer. Well, she said, as Evan nervously set his notebook down on the desk. "Let's see what you've got." Evan opened his notebook, laying out the sketches and plans for the new airplane design. He explained the concept of integrating a wind turbine into the hybrid system, his hopes of extending the flight time, and how it could change the future of sustainable aviation. He spoke quickly, his words tumbling over each other in a rush of excitement. Dr. Brooks listened intently, nodding occasionally. When he was finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping thoughtfully on the desk. "I like what I'm hearing, Evan," she said after a long pause. "But you've got a lot of work ahead of you. A wind turbine is no small feat, and integrating it into your airplane's design will be tricky." Evan's heart sank. Was she saying it was impossible? "But," Dr. Brooks continued, smiling now, "I can help you. I'll be here to guide you, to make sure you understand the principles behind it. We'll work through the challenges together." Evan couldn't believe it. Dr. Brooks was offering to mentor him, to help him bring his dream to life. His excitement bubbled up again, stronger than ever. Over the next several weeks, Evan worked side by side with Dr. Brooks. They spent hours discussing aerodynamics, energy efficiency, and the complex systems that powered both the solar panels and the wind turbine. Dr. Brooks encouraged Evan to think critically, to question every assumption, and to never stop learning. The hours were long, the work often frustrating. There were days when Evan felt like throwing in the towel, when the wind turbine wouldn't spin, or the new battery system wasn't powerful enough. But Dr. Brooks always reminded him, failure is just a lesson. If it doesn't work, it means you're one step closer to figuring out how to make it work. And slowly, step by step, the hybrid solar-wind-powered airplane began to take shape. One Saturday, just as they were wrapping up another session at Dr. Brooks' office, there was a knock on the door. Evan turned to see a familiar face, Elon Musk. Evan's heart raced. What was Musk doing here? Had he come to check on his progress? Or had he come to offer more critiques? Elon smiled, his usual confident expression softened with a hint of curiosity. "I heard you were working on something interesting, Evan," he said. "Mind if I take a look?" Evan, still stunned, nodded. He had to admit, he wasn't expecting Musk to be involved, especially not after the challenge Musk had issued at the science fair. But here he was, in the same room, looking at Evan's work. Evan took a deep breath and stepped aside, allowing Musk to get a closer look at the plane. As the two men examined the design, Musk's eyebrows lifted slightly. "You're using a hybrid system?" he asked, impressed. "That's bold. It's risky, but it could work. You've got the potential here, kid. Just keep pushing forward." For the first time since the science fair, Evan felt a sense of validation. Musk's words weren't just encouragement, they were a recognition of the progress he had made. A recognition that this wasn't just a failed project. It was a journey, and it was far from over. Weeks passed in a blur of wire, circuits, and endless calculations. Evan and Dr. Brooks worked tirelessly, testing prototypes, modifying designs, and sometimes going back to the drawing board when things didn't work out. Despite the setbacks, Evan felt a surge of purpose that he had never experienced before. This was it, the breakthrough moment he'd been waiting for. The hybrid airplane was coming together. Every part of it was now an intricate dance between solar energy and wind power. The solar panels, which had initially seemed like the heart of the airplane's propulsion, were now paired with a sleek, compact wind turbine mounted on the tail. The turbine was small but powerful, generating enough energy to supplement the solar power when the plane was grounded or flying in low light conditions. The energy storage system, once fragile and inefficient, had been overhauled into a cutting-edge battery bank that could sustain longer flights. But as they neared completion, the pressure began to mount. Musk's words still echoed in Evan's mind, "Think bigger." Was this enough? Would this truly be the project that could change the world? What if it failed again? What if his dream crumbled before he even had the chance to show it to the world? Evan knew that failure was part of the process, but his fear of disappointing those who had supported him, especially Dr. Brooks, pushed him to the edge. The day of the first test flight finally arrived. It was an unusually warm afternoon, the air still and calm, ideal for testing the plane. Evan stood on the tarmac, his hands trembling as he adjusted the plane's wings for the final time. The sun blazed overhead, the solar panels gleaming with potential energy. "Are you ready?" Dr. Brooks asked, her voice steady, but there was an undercurrent of excitement in her words. She stood beside Evan, arms crossed, watching him carefully. Evan nodded, though inside, he felt like his stomach was a twisted knot. He stepped back, giving the plane some space, and took a deep breath. "Ready." He flicked the switch. The motors hummed to life, the wind turbine began to spin, and the solar panels gleamed as the plane slowly began to lift off the ground. Evan's heart pounded as the aircraft took to the sky, its hybrid system working in perfect harmony. For a moment, it felt like the entire world held its breath, as if time itself had frozen. The plane hovered, stable and strong. But then something unexpected happened. The plane didn't just hover. It climbed. Slowly, steadily, it began to soar higher and higher, powered by the hybrid system Evan had designed. The wind turbine whirred loudly, adding its energy to the solar panels. The batteries kicked in, maintaining a steady flow of power as the plane reached greater and greater altitudes. Evan's jaw dropped. It was working. It was really working. Evan's hands gripped the controls, but the sensation in his chest wasn't fear anymore. It was pure exhilaration. The world below seemed to fall away as the plane climbed higher. He could feel the energy surging through the hybrid system, the seamless interaction between the solar power and the wind turbine. It was more than just an airplane. It was a symbol of everything he'd hoped for: innovation, sustainability, and the power of one small idea to change the world. But then, just as quickly as the thrill had come, it faded. The plane suddenly dipped. For a moment, it felt like everything was crashing down. The altitude dropped rapidly, the whirring of the wind turbine faltering. The solar panels, which had once been so reliable, were now failing to generate enough power to keep the motors running. Evan's heart sank. "No, not again. Not like this. Come on, come on." Evan whispered desperately, his hands fumbling for the controls. He adjusted the angle, trying to force the plane to regain altitude. His mind raced, thinking through every possible reason for the malfunction. He had tested this. He had run simulations. This wasn't supposed to happen. The plane wobbled once more, threatening to plummet. Evan's vision blurred. The fear that he had pushed away for so long returned with a vengeance. He thought of Musk's challenge, of all the people who had believed in him. Could he really pull this off? "Don't give up, Evan," Dr. Brooks called out from the sidelines, her voice sharp, full of conviction. "You've come too far to back down now. Fix it. Think." Evan blinked, hearing her words through the panic. Think. He forced himself to take a step back, mentally. He thought of the changes he'd made, the modifications that had worked during the tests. The hybrid system was still in its early stages, but Evan had always known that it wouldn't be perfect from the start. The issue wasn't the design. It was a small electrical malfunction that had caused the power loss. He could fix it. He just needed to remain calm. Evan took a deep breath and adjusted the angle of the plane once more. He turned off the solar power for a moment to allow the wind turbine to recharge the batteries, then flicked the solar panels back on as the plane began to stabilize. He could feel the balance returning. Gradually, the plane regained its altitude. The motors hummed back to life. The wind turbine spun with renewed vigor, and the solar panels reflected the sun's rays with perfect precision. The plane was stable again, this time for longer than before. Evan had done it. He had figured it out. The moment was everything Evan had dreamed of and more. His heart raced with triumph as he watched the hybrid airplane glide smoothly through the sky. The plane that had started as a simple idea was now becoming a reality, a real, working prototype. Just as the plane reached its peak altitude, Evan heard the familiar hum of an electric vehicle approaching. He looked down to see a Tesla driving toward the tarmac. The vehicle came to a halt, and out stepped none other than Elon Musk himself. Evan's pulse quickened. This was the moment, the culmination of all his hard work. Would Musk be impressed? Would he see the potential in what Evan had built? Musk's eyes scanned the sky, following the path of the plane as it circled overhead. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "You did it, Evan," Musk said, his voice calm but filled with respect. "You thought bigger, and you made it happen." Evan grinned, feeling a sense of pride swell inside him. He hadn't just built an airplane. He had built something that had the potential to change the future. And in that moment, he knew that this was only the beginning. The days that followed the successful test flight were a blur of excitement. News of Evan's breakthrough spread quickly. Local news outlets, tech blogs, and even national media outlets were now paying attention to the 10-year-old prodigy who had created a hybrid solar wind-powered airplane. But as much as Evan appreciated the attention, he couldn't help but feel a little overwhelmed. The praise, the cameras, the interviews, it was all a lot for someone his age to handle. But there was one thing that mattered more than anything else. The plane. Evan had done it. He had created something that worked. And now, the real challenge began, making it available to the world. He had spent so many sleepless nights thinking about how his invention could change the future of transportation, how it could revolutionize aviation and reduce humanity's dependence on fossil fuels. But now, with all the attention and pressure, Evan felt a new sense of responsibility weighing on him. As he sat at his desk in his room one evening, looking over the data from the test flight, a new idea began to form in his mind. What if this was only the first step? What if the technology could be expanded to something even bigger, something that could one day be used on commercial flights? He thought back to his conversation with Elon Musk, when Musk had told him, "Think bigger." It was a challenge that Evan had accepted with all his heart. And now, it was time to turn that challenge into something more. Evan wasn't just building an airplane anymore. He was building a future. Dr. Brooks had warned him that this would be a long road, that perfecting the design and scaling it for commercial use would take years. But Evan had always been the type to dive headfirst into the unknown, to take risks that others wouldn't dare to take. The idea of building a full-scale commercial hybrid plane, one that could fly across continents using nothing but renewable energy, was an ambitious goal. But it was a goal that felt within reach. And that wasn't the only thing on his mind. Evan's family, his friends, and the whole community had been watching him, cheering him on. Evan knew he couldn't let them down. But there was something else, the message. The world needed to hear the message of sustainable energy and the power of innovation in young minds. If Evan's project could inspire even one other person to think bigger, to dream bigger, it would all be worth it. A few days after the successful test flight, Elon Musk called Evan. The conversation started off casually, but Evan could sense the weight of Musk's words as they spoke about the potential of Evan's design. "You're on the right track, Evan," Musk said. "But the future of this technology depends on two things: scale and accessibility. If you can make this technology affordable and widely available, that's where the real impact lies. The next step is to think about how this could be used not just in personal aircraft, but in commercial aviation and beyond." Evan listened intently. Musk wasn't just congratulating him, he was challenging him again. Musk's vision was clear. Sustainable energy was the future. And if Evan was serious about making a change, he needed to think about how to bring this technology to the masses. The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, discussions, and brainstorming sessions. Dr. Brooks was with Evan every step of the way, helping him refine his ideas and approach. But now, they were joined by a team of engineers and experts from around the world. Musk's team at Tesla and SpaceX had shown interest in Evan's project, and they offered to help with the technical and logistical challenges of scaling it up. For Evan, this was both exciting and humbling. He had started this journey alone, with nothing more than a dream. Now, he was at the forefront of a global movement towards sustainable aviation, with some of the most brilliant minds in the world backing him up. Together, they worked tirelessly to develop a prototype for a full-scale, solar-powered commercial aircraft. The challenges were immense, but the sense of purpose and urgency pushed them all forward. Evan had a new understanding of what it took to make a true impact. It wasn't just about creating something that worked, it was about creating something that could change the world for good. One quiet evening, after a long day of meetings, Evan sat by the window in his room, watching the sun dip below the horizon. He thought about everything he had been through, the moments of doubt, the setbacks, the moments of triumph. He thought about the challenges of building something that seemed impossible, about the advice from Dr. Brooks and Musk, and the incredible support from his family and friends. He realized something. This wasn't just about building an airplane. It was about building confidence in the power of innovation. The world needed to see that age, background, or experience didn't define what was possible. What mattered was the willingness to learn, to grow, and to dream big. A year after the first successful test flight, the hybrid solar wind-powered airplane was ready for its final test. This time, it wasn't just a small prototype. It was a fully functioning, commercial-scale version designed to carry passengers across short distances, powered entirely by renewable energy. The stakes were higher than ever. The team had worked day and night to perfect the design, and now it was time to see if it could actually change the way people thought about air travel. Evans stood on the tarmac, watching as the massive aircraft was prepared for takeoff. His heart was racing. He had been part of every step of this journey, from the first test flight to the prototype to the final version. Now, it was time to see if this plane could actually fly. The engines roared to life, the turbines spun, and the solar panels caught the sun's rays as the plane lifted off the ground. It soared into the sky, smoothly and steadily, as Evan watched in awe. This time, there were no malfunctions, no glitches. The plane was flying, just as it had been designed to. It was a historic moment. For Evan, for Dr. Brooks, for Elon Musk, and for the world. The future of aviation had arrived. The world was now paying attention. After the final test flight, Evan's invention was no longer just a local curiosity or a science project. It was a global phenomenon. Headlines from tech magazines, newspapers, and social media platforms spread like wildfire, declaring him as the young innovator who had created a solar wind-powered airplane capable of revolutionizing the aviation industry. Elon Musk's endorsement had cemented the project's credibility, and soon, venture capitalists and governments from all over the world were knocking on Evan's door. Investors, environmental organizations, and even aviation companies were eager to see the project take the next big leap. Everyone wanted a piece of the future Evan was creating. But with the rapid rise in attention came new challenges Evan had never anticipated. The stakes had been raised, and the pressure to deliver was greater than ever. Evan's life had shifted dramatically in the weeks following the announcement of his success. The young boy who had once tinkered alone in his garage was now the center of a whirlwind of attention. His school, his community, and even the country were now rooting for him. But as the support came pouring in, so did the doubts and conflicts. Evan had always been a curious, inquisitive child, quick to take risks and follow his intuition. But now that the spotlight was on him, his decisions had far-reaching consequences. Every move, every word, was scrutinized. One of the biggest challenges came in the form of corporate investors. They saw Evan's project as an incredible opportunity, but they also saw it as a financial venture. The pressure to turn his idea into a commercially viable product was mounting quickly. "We need to move faster, Evan," one of the investors told him during a conference call. "The market's ready for this. The aviation industry is ripe for disruption, and we want to be the ones to lead it. Your technology could change everything, but we need results, and we need them now." Evan's eyes narrowed as he listened. The words were meant to be encouraging, but Evan could sense the urgency and expectation behind them. These investors didn't care about how things were done. They cared about when they were done. They weren't the kind of people who had followed him from the beginning. They were the ones who wanted to take the technology and use it for their own gain. On the other side of the spectrum were the environmental activists, who saw Evan's invention as a potential game-changer for the planet. They praised his design as a step toward reducing the aviation industry's carbon footprint, but they also had concerns. "Yes, the technology is impressive, Evan, But you need to understand the impact of scaling this up, one environmental leader said in an interview. While hybrid solar wind planes might seem like a clean alternative, we also need to ensure that we're not sacrificing other forms of sustainability. Scaling too fast could lead to unintended consequences, like increased energy consumption in production or a demand for resources that could end up being just as damaging. Evan felt the weight of their concerns. These were voices that had been with him since the beginning, encouraging him to think not just about technology, but about the world's long-term well-being. But now, with everyone pushing him to move faster, Evan wondered if he was losing sight of what mattered most, the sustainability of his creation. The real turning point came when Evan had his first heated disagreement with Dr. Brooks. Dr. Brooks had been with Evan every step of the way, guiding him, encouraging him, and reminding him of the importance of careful, deliberate progress. But now, she seemed increasingly concerned. As much as she had believed in the potential of the technology, she wasn't sure that Evan, at only 10 years old, was ready for the kind of responsibility that was about to be thrust upon him. "Evan, I know you're excited, but we have to take a step back," Dr. Brooks said one evening, her voice filled with concern. "This is becoming too much. You're dealing with major corporations, billion-dollar investments, and the hopes of the entire industry. You need to slow down. If we push too fast, we could risk the entire project." Evan stared at her, frustration bubbling inside him. He knew what she meant, but this was his dream, his vision. He had worked so hard to get here. Every time he looked out at the sky, he could almost feel the future taking shape. It was within reach, but only if he could take the next step. "You don't understand," Evan shot back, his voice sharper than he meant. "If I don't move fast enough, they'll pull out. I can't let that happen. I can't let everyone down. This is bigger than just me. It's bigger than any one person." Dr. Brooks sighed. "I know, Evan. I know. But sometimes, the bigger picture is about sustainability and thoughtful progress, not just the end result. You can't let the pressure change your mission." The conflict with Dr. Brooks lingered in Evan's mind for days, gnawing at him. He had always trusted her, but now he couldn't help but feel like she didn't understand the urgency. Was he moving too fast? Was he risking his dream for the wrong reasons? At night, Evan would lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation in his head. The pressure to succeed was crushing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was his one chance to make a real difference. Musk had seen something in him, and so had the world. But now, Evan had to face the hardest part of all, the weight of expectation. He realized that as the world watched, he wasn't just facing the challenge of building an airplane. He was facing the challenge of keeping his vision intact while navigating the corporate world, the environmental concerns, and the pressure to deliver results on a timeline he hadn't set for himself. A few days after his argument with Dr. Brooks, Evan received a message from none other than Elon Musk. "Let me guess," the message began. "You're feeling overwhelmed by all the people telling you what to do and how to do it. It's not easy. The whole world wants to see you succeed, but not everyone has the same idea of what success looks like." Evan read the words carefully, feeling both comforted and challenged. Musk went on to say, "The one thing I've learned in all my years of building companies and technologies is this. You need to decide what your vision is and stick to it. The pressure will always be there, and people will always try to tell you how to get there. But if you lose sight of why you started in the first place, it's not worth it." Evan smiled, feeling a sense of clarity wash over him. Musk was right. He didn't have to listen to every opinion. What mattered was that he stayed true to his mission, no matter what. The phone call came on a cool morning in late spring. Evan had just finished breakfast when his mother handed him the phone. "Elon Musk is on the line," she said, a note of disbelief in her voice. Evan's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the first time Musk had reached out, but this call felt different. He swallowed hard as he took the phone. "Evan." Musk's voice was as direct as always, but this time, there was a note of urgency in it. "I've got a challenge for you. It's going to be big. The kind of big that will change the way the world looks at energy and aviation forever." Evan leaned forward. "What kind of challenge?" Musk paused for a moment before speaking. "I want you to prove that the hybrid solar wind airplane can handle a global flight, from coast to coast, across the Pacific. Can it travel halfway around the world on nothing but solar and wind power? We'll put the plane to the test, live. Evan's mind raced as the magnitude of the task sunk in. A global flight? Halfway around the world? It was one thing to test the technology on a smaller scale. It was another thing entirely to push it to the limits of endurance and geography. Musk wasn't asking for a simple flight. He was asking for a statement, a demonstration that Evan's vision wasn't just a fleeting idea but something that could change the world's approach to travel. Evan sat down with Dr. Brooks, the team of engineers, and a few representatives from Tesla and SpaceX who had flown in to discuss the feasibility of Musk's challenge. The plan was simple on paper: fly a hybrid solar wind-powered airplane across vast distances, testing its efficiency, sustainability, and reliability. The idea was to fly from the west coast of the United States to a destination on the Pacific Rim, Japan, Australia, or even further if the technology allowed. But as simple as it sounded, the execution was a different story. There were countless hurdles to overcome. First, Evan's design, although groundbreaking, had never been tested on such long distances. The weather patterns, wind currents, and unpredictable conditions of flying across oceans were all variables that no one could account for with complete certainty. "We'll need to modify the plane," Dr. Brooks said, looking at the schematics on her tablet. "This isn't just a test flight anymore. It's a long-duration, high-stakes journey. The hybrid system will need to be adapted to account for changing weather conditions, fluctuating wind patterns, and the inability to rely on solar energy at night." Evan felt a twinge of doubt in his stomach. This was no longer a small-scale project. It was a global challenge, one that would either prove his innovation or destroy it. But he also felt something else: excitement. This was what he had dreamed of, to prove that renewable energy could power more than just everyday life. It could power the skies. If they succeeded, it would be a game-changer for aviation, for the environment, and for the future of energy. Weeks of preparation followed. Every part of the plane was scrutinized, reinforced, and optimized for the task ahead. Evan and his team worked tirelessly to ensure that the plane was equipped with the latest technology to handle the rigorous demands of the flight. Evan couldn't help but feel the pressure mounting as the date for the flight drew nearer. Each day, the stakes seemed higher. His invention had already gained global attention, but this flight? It would be the ultimate test. It would prove whether this dream could turn into reality or fall apart in the skies. The countdown clock ticked away, each second reminding Evan of how little time they had left. The world was watching. There was no room for error. The day before the flight, Evan stood by the airplane on the runway. It looked almost surreal, a testament to months of hard work, innovation, and sacrifice. But even as he marveled at the sight of it, a nagging question lingered in his mind. Could it really do it? Could the technology hold up over thousands of miles? As he climbed into the cockpit, ready for the journey ahead, he looked over at Dr. Brooks, who gave him a reassuring smile. "You've got this, Evan," she said, her voice steady but filled with pride. The first few hours of the flight went smoothly. The sun was shining, the winds were favorable, and the plane soared steadily through the sky. Evan couldn't help but marvel at the quiet efficiency of the hybrid system, how the wind turbines hummed in perfect harmony with the solar panels, gathering energy from both the sun and the wind as they passed through the clouds. But as the hours passed, challenges began to surface. As they reached the midpoint of their journey, the weather began to change. The plane encountered unexpected turbulence, and the energy from the solar panels began to fluctuate. For the first time, Evan felt a rising sense of uncertainty. "Evan, we're losing altitude," one of the engineers reported over the comms. "The wind speed isn't enough to keep us on track. We might need to rely more on the backup solar battery." Evan's mind raced as he glanced at the instruments. He could see that the plane's energy levels were dropping, and the backup solar battery wasn't providing enough charge to maintain altitude. The wind turbines were being less effective due to the lack of consistent wind at this altitude. As night fell and the darkness enveloped the plane, Evan faced the most critical moment of the journey: the unknown. The solar panels would not be effective in the dark, and the energy reserves were dangerously low. The wind was not cooperating either. The hybrid system, which had been so reliable in controlled conditions, was now being tested in the most unpredictable environment on Earth, the vast ocean. Evan's heart pounded as the plane's engines began to sputter. He glanced at Dr. Brooks, who was in the back, her expression tense but focused. The team had been preparing for this possibility, but Evan knew that this was the ultimate test of his creation. "Evan, I need you to trust the system." Dr. Brooks's voice crackled through the comms. "We've designed this to handle tough situations. You need to let the turbines pick up the slack. Conserve the battery." Evan nodded, taking a deep breath. The entire world was watching as the plane dipped and swayed through the turbulence. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. The plane's stability was teetering on the edge. The storm was relentless. For hours, Evan fought to keep the plane steady. The once calm skies had turned dark and turbulent, with wind gusts battering the wings and rain pelting the aircraft. The solar panels were useless in the pitch-black night, and the wind turbines were struggling to generate enough power. The backup solar batteries, which had been designed for emergencies, were rapidly depleting. Evan's fingers gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white. He had trained for this moment, studied every variable, prepared for every worst-case scenario, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer magnitude of the storm. The violent winds threatened to tear the aircraft apart, and Evan could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. "This isn't good, Evan." The lead engineer's voice came over the comms, trembling with urgency. "We're losing altitude fast. The batteries are almost drained. If we don't stabilize, we could fall into the ocean." Evan's heart raced. The world was watching, live, in real time. A failure now would mean not just the end of the flight, but the end of his dream. He had to make it work. "Stay calm," Evan whispered to himself, his breath shaky but resolute. "I can do this. We can do this." As the plane dipped lower, the flickering lights in the cockpit became even more erratic. The indicators were showing that the energy was dangerously low, and with every passing second, the plane's altitude decreased. Evan could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he had to act, and fast. For a brief moment, doubt crept into his mind. Was it all a mistake? Maybe he had overestimated the potential of the technology. Maybe Musk's challenge had been too ambitious. The stakes were too high, the risk too great. The young inventor had taken the world's faith, built it into a dream, and now he could see it unraveling before his eyes. Evan turned his head toward the back of the cockpit where Dr. Brooks had been silently monitoring the situation. Her face was drawn tight, but her eyes were still filled with that familiar sense of determination. "Evan," Dr. Brooks said, her voice calm but firm, "you know what this system can do. Trust it. Trust yourself." Her words cut through the tension in the cockpit like a knife. Trust yourself. It was the one thing Evan hadn't considered in that moment of panic. Evan's mind snapped back into focus. He remembered every principle they had studied in his years of working on this project. The plane's hybrid system wasn't just about solar and wind power. It was about using every resource available, no matter how unpredictable or fleeting. He had to stop thinking of the storm as an enemy and start seeing it as an opportunity. Evan adjusted the controls, manually shifting the turbines to harness the wind gusts more efficiently. He adjusted the plane's altitude, focusing on finding the sweet spot where the turbulence was less violent and the air currents could work with him, not against him. His heart raced, but his movements became deliberate. Every decision, every moment, had to be precise. He felt the plane shift, and for the first time in hours, the wind turbines began to hum in a steady rhythm, pulling energy from the storm. Slowly, the altitude began to stabilize. The backup batteries, though low, kicked in with just enough power to keep the systems running. The plane crept upward, regaining its flight path as the storm began to lose its ferocity. Back on the ground, the world was watching. Rivers of live commentary, millions of viewers holding their breath as Evan's journey unfolded before their eyes. News outlets, tech blogs, environmental groups, and aviation enthusiasts were all glued to their screens. Every person, from the common onlooker to the billion-dollar investors, was waiting for the outcome. And then, a spark of hope, a message flashed across the live feed. The hybrid solar wind-powered plane has stabilized. Evan Roberts has overcome the storm. The relief was palpable. News stations from around the world erupted in celebration, but Evan couldn't hear the cheers. His focus was on the plane, on maintaining control, on pushing forward. Keep going, Evan whispered to himself, as if willing the plane to continue. Just as Evan thought the worst was behind him, a new voice crackled over the radio, cutting through the tension. "Elon Musk here." Musk's voice rang out clearly. "Evan, I've been following the live feed. I know it's been a rough ride, but what you just did, that's the real test. It's not just about building the plane. It's about the resilience to keep going when everything is on the line. You've already won in my book." Evan's hands tightened on the controls. It was the first time he had heard Musk's voice since the flight began, and hearing that validation, hearing those words of encouragement, brought him a new sense of energy. He wasn't alone in this anymore. The weight of the world was still heavy, but it was now shared by others who believed in him. "Stay focused, Evan," Musk continued. "The next part of this journey will be a little easier. We're with you all the way." The storm eventually passed, and as the sky began to clear, Evan saw it, a patch of sunlight breaking through the clouds. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. For the first time since takeoff, the plane seemed to be gliding effortlessly. The hybrid system hummed smoothly, and the solar panels began to collect energy once again. The turbines kept spinning, and the horizon ahead was clearer than it had been for hours. Evan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. The world was still watching, and it wasn't just the flight that mattered now. It was the message. The future of aviation was possible, clean, sustainable, and powered by the forces of nature itself. Evan had just shown the world that even in the face of impossible odds, innovation and perseverance could light the way forward. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The storm had passed, but Evan still felt the weight of it pressing on his chest. The skies were clearing, and the plane was finally stable, but the journey was far from over. As the last vestiges of turbulence faded away, Evan found himself staring out of the cockpit, watching the endless expanse of the ocean below. He could feel the eyes of the world on him, but the worst was behind him now. The plane hummed steadily as it continued its course toward the Pacific Rim. Evan took a moment to close his eyes and breathe, the adrenaline from the storm finally ebbing away. It was as if the cloud of tension that had hung over him for hours was now lifting, replaced with a calm sense of purpose. The worst thing that could have happened, losing the plane, losing the dream, had not come to pass. Instead, something remarkable was happening. The journey was changing. Evan had always known that this plane was more than just a machine. It wasn't just about breaking records or creating the world's first solar wind hybrid airplane. It was about something bigger, a statement to the world that a sustainable, renewable future wasn't just possible, it was already within reach. The plane wasn't just an airplane. It was the future taking flight. In that moment, Evan realized that this journey, despite all the dangers and obstacles, wasn't just about proving the technology. It was about proving something to himself. It was about his vision coming to life, against all odds. It wasn't just Elon Musk, the tech world, or the world at large who was watching. Evan was watching too. He was proving to himself that no matter how young, no matter how small or underestimated, anyone with enough vision, determination, and innovation could change the world. And as he flew across the sky, he thought about all the people who had helped him get to this point, his team, his family, and those who had believed in him from the start. Most importantly, he thought about the message he could send to the next generation of innovators. Anything was possible. By the time the plane began its descent toward its destination, Evan had regained full confidence in the aircraft. The hybrid system, despite the challenges, had performed flawlessly. The energy from the sun, the wind, and the backup systems had worked together in perfect harmony, allowing the plane to cover vast distances without relying on traditional fuel. Evan had done it. As the airport came into view, the lights of the city below reflecting off the water, a sense of calm washed over him. The worst was behind him. His plane had not only survived the storm, it had thrived. And now, the world would know that this technology, this vision, was more than just a dream. It was real. The plane touched down smoothly on the runway, the wheels gently kissing the ground. The engines were down, and Evan took a moment to savor the quiet that followed. The world had been holding its breath, and now, as the plane slowed to a stop, the world would exhale in collective awe. On the tarmac, a crowd of reporters, camera crews, and dignitaries were waiting. The moment the plane came to a halt, the crowd erupted in applause. Musk, who had flown out to the location, was among the first to reach the aircraft. His eyes were filled with admiration, and his grin stretched from ear to ear. "You did it, Evan," Musk said, extending his hand. "You really did it." Evan, overwhelmed with emotion, shook his hand. He had done it, not just for himself, but for every single person who had doubted him, who had told him that it couldn't be done. As Evan stepped out of the cockpit, the crowd cheered louder, chanting his name. Evan, Evan. It wasn't just the reporters who were impressed, it was everyone. This wasn't just a victory for a young genius. This was a victory for renewable energy, for sustainability, and for the future of aviation. The media would soon be flooded with headlines about the young inventor who had flown across the Pacific powered by nothing but the forces of nature. Evan stood there, absorbing the moment. He felt like a small part of something much bigger than himself. This was history in the making. Musk stood beside him, putting his arm around his shoulder. "I've seen a lot of innovation in my life, Evan," he said, "but this is the future." Evan smiled, but his thoughts were already drifting ahead to the next challenge, the next step. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. As the celebrations continued, Evan felt a sense of fulfillment. He had achieved something incredible, but this victory was only the beginning. There was still so much work to be done. There were more tests to conduct, more improvements to make, and above all, there were more young minds out there who would be inspired by what he had just done. He looked up at the sky, the same sky he had once stared at, dreaming of what could be. It was a reminder that the future was open to anyone willing to reach for it. And as Evan turned to Musk, ready to discuss the next phase of their journey, he realized something that he hadn't fully understood until now. This wasn't just about proving the world wrong. It was about showing everyone, including himself, that the impossible could be made possible. The days following Evan's historic flight felt like a whirlwind. The media coverage was endless, with interviews, articles, and news reports flooding in from around the world. It wasn't just tech blogs and aviation journals that were covering the story, it was everywhere. Evan Roberts had become a household name, a symbol of what the future could look like if we all dared to dream bigger. From the moment he landed, everything changed. Elon Musk wasn't the only one who had been watching. Investors, environmental groups, government officials, and researchers were all reaching out. They saw Evan's flight as more than a technological breakthrough. They saw it as the key to revolutionizing aviation, fighting climate change, and reshaping the way we think about energy. Evan was no longer just a young inventor with a passion for aviation. He was now the face of a new movement, a movement towards sustainable, renewable energy in the skies. His plane, with its hybrid solar wind power design, was just the beginning of what could be the future of air travel. Musk was already on the phone with him regularly, discussing ways to scale the project. "Evan," Musk said during one of their conversations, "we're not just talking about creating one plane. We're talking about transforming the entire industry." That conversation sparked a new level of excitement in Evan. This wasn't a one-off project anymore. This was the beginning of a revolution. "Imagine a world where every airplane is powered by clean energy," Musk continued, "where the sky is no longer polluted with jet fuel. You've proven it can be done. Now, we scale it." Evan felt the weight of it. He wasn't just working on a plane anymore. He was working on a global solution. However, even with all the attention and the new partnerships, Evan knew that the journey was far from easy. The hybrid system that had worked so well during the Pacific flight still had its limitations. The technology needed to be refined, the materials improved, and the energy efficiency increased. As the discussions with Musk deepened, they began planning a series of tests to push the plane to its limits. They would need to simulate long-haul flights, navigate through various weather conditions, and ensure that the technology could be adapted to the needs of large-scale aviation. Evan and Musk also realized that it wasn't just about the plane. It was about the infrastructure to support it. The world's airports would need to be retrofitted to handle solar and wind-powered planes. The energy grids that supported aviation would need to evolve. This would require global cooperation, significant investment, and long-term planning. "We're talking about an entire ecosystem," Evan said one evening, as he and Musk sat down to chart the path forward. "It's going to take time." "I know," Musk replied, "but we're starting with something that people have only dreamed about. And the sooner we start, the sooner the world will realize that the dream is possible." The more Evan thought about it, the more he understood just how pivotal this moment in history was. His small plane, built with nothing more than his own hands, had become a symbol of hope, a beacon for anyone who had ever doubted that a small idea could change the world. Evan knew that people would continue to doubt him and the technology. There would be setbacks, failures, and challenges along the way. But the message had been sent. The world had seen that it was possible. And that, Evan believed, was the most powerful thing of all. Soon after the flight, Evan was invited to speak at schools, universities, and conferences around the world. Everywhere he went, there were students and young innovators eager to hear his story. He had become a mentor, an inspiration, someone who proved that age wasn't a barrier to success. One of his favorite events was when he visited a local middle school, where a group of students presented him with their own prototype for a solar-powered vehicle. "We saw what you did," one of them said, "and now we want to build something just as cool." Evan smiled, feeling the weight of the future shift once again. This wasn't just about his success anymore. It was about empowering the next generation to take the torch and run even further. As the months passed, Evan's role began to evolve. While Musk and his team worked on the technical aspects of the project, Evan focused on spreading the message and rallying support for the cause. He traveled across the globe, meeting with environmental leaders, business moguls, and government officials, each time advocating for a future powered by clean, renewable energy. And as the plane continued to perform well in subsequent tests, Evan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The technology they had developed was only one part of the equation. They needed to create a movement. They needed to show the world that this wasn't just a technological breakthrough. It was a way to combat climate change, reduce pollution, and help save the planet for future generations. A year after Evan's groundbreaking flight, the first commercial test flights using the hybrid solar wind technology were scheduled. The world's eyes were once again on him, this time with even more intensity. Would it work? Could Evan's vision truly change the way the world thought about air travel? Evan stood on the runway, looking up at the massive aircraft before him, which now bore the name of the program, Project Skygreen. It was the culmination of everything they had worked for, a plane that ran on solar and wind energy, capable of long-haul flights, ready to reduce the aviation industry's carbon footprint. "Ready, Evan?" Musk's voice broke through the silence. Evan smiled, feeling the weight of everything he had accomplished. The dream had grown beyond what he had ever imagined. "Let's make history," he said. Despite the overwhelming excitement surrounding Evan's flight and the growing support for Project Skygreen, not everyone was convinced that his vision was sustainable in the long term. The media continued to be captivated by his story, but a new narrative began to emerge. One that questioned whether the world was truly ready for such a radical shift in aviation. During a live interview on one of the most popular news networks, an expert in aviation technology, Dr. Jacob Hartman, had raised concerns. While Evan Roberts' achievement is impressive, Hartman said, "We must recognize that we are still far from being able to replace traditional jet fuel with renewable energy on a global scale. The hybrid solar wind system may be a nice concept for short flights, but it isn't feasible for long-haul, international travel just yet." The statement hit Evan harder than he expected. He had always known that his plane was just the beginning. There were still many hurdles to overcome. But hearing a respected expert dismiss the technology publicly, especially after all the hard work he had put in, felt like a slap in the face. He sat in his living room, staring at the TV as the interview replayed. His mother, Karen, entered the room, sitting beside him on the couch. "You okay, honey?" she asked softly, her voice filled with concern. Evan exhaled deeply, unsure of what to say. "It just feels like they think I'm not serious. Like they think this was all just a lucky experiment." Karen placed a hand on his shoulder. "You know better than anyone how far you've come. You've shown the world that it's possible. You can't let one person's doubts overshadow everything you've accomplished." Evan nodded, but the doubt lingered in his mind. Was Dr. Hartman right? Were they really ready for the scale of what he was proposing? The next morning, Elon Musk called Evan, sensing the young inventor's frustration. "I saw the interview," Musk said, his voice steady but firm. "Don't let him get to you. He's doing his job, challenging ideas. That's what experts do." "I know, but it just feels like everyone is questioning if we can actually do this. What if they're right? What if the technology isn't scalable?" Musk was silent for a moment before responding. "When I started with Tesla, people laughed at me. They said electric cars would never be viable, that there was no future in solar energy. They said it was all too risky, too unproven. But look where we are now. The technology is possible, but it takes time, iteration, and resilience. Don't let doubt control you." Evan sat up straighter. Musk's words were like a shot of adrenaline to his spirit. "I'm in this for the long run," he said. "I just need to make sure we're not wasting our time." Musk laughed softly. "Trust me, you're on the right path. You've already shown the world what's possible. Now it's time to make it inevitable." Evan couldn't shake the feeling of doubt, but he knew Musk was right. The naysayers were always going to be there, especially when someone dared to challenge the status quo. If anything, the skepticism only fueled his determination. He wasn't just building a plane. He was building a legacy. He decided it was time to take the next step in proving his vision. No more just proving the technology worked in controlled environments. He needed to push the limits further. Evan began planning the next phase of Project Skygreen, a global test flight series. The goal was clear: to prove that the hybrid solar wind system could handle long-haul international flights under various weather conditions across different time zones and with varying levels of solar and wind energy. It wasn't just about one plane anymore. It was about creating a viable alternative to fossil fuel-powered aviation on a global scale. Months of preparation and collaboration went into the new test flights. Evan worked with Musk's team at SpaceX and Tesla to optimize the plane systems. They designed an energy-efficient battery pack that could store more energy during the day, ensuring that the plane could fly longer distances during the night when solar power wasn't available. Alongside the technical work, Evan began meeting with government officials and representatives from major airlines, pitching them the idea of partnering with the project. The goal was simple: to show that they could deliver a working, scalable model for the future of air travel. Evan and Musk knew it would take years to fully realize the potential of solar and wind-powered planes, but they needed to make that first big leap. As the date for the first test flight drew nearer, a sense of urgency grew. There was so much riding on this next phase, not just for Evan, but for everyone who had believed in him and the project. Every new hurdle was met with increased pressure, and the world was watching. One evening, Musk invited Evan to dinner at one of his private residences. After a long day of meetings and progress checks, they sat down, enjoying a quiet meal together. "You know, when I was your age," Musk began, "I was just as eager to prove myself. I had big ideas, and people laughed at me, told me it wasn't possible. I didn't always have the right answers, but I had the conviction to keep moving forward. That's what this is about. It's not just about being right. It's about making things happen." Evan listened intently, sensing the weight behind Musk's words. "I just hope we're not moving too fast. What if we fail?" Musk smiled, his eyes reflecting years of experience. "Failure is part of the process. The only true failure is quitting. If you're going to fail, fail forward. Learn, adapt, and keep pushing. If you're doing something no one's ever done before, failure is inevitable. But that's when the real progress happens." Evan took a deep breath. He knew Musk was right. This was his moment to prove not just the technology, but also his own resolve. The day of the first global test flight arrived. News outlets from around the world gathered at the launch site, eager to witness the next chapter of Evan's journey. The plane was prepped, the systems were checked, and the team stood ready. Musk stood beside Evan, a reassuring presence. "This is it," Musk said, clapping Evan on the back. "The future starts now." Evan nodded, feeling a rush of emotions flood over him. But there was no time to dwell on doubt. This was what he had worked for. And now, it was time to see if his vision could soar. The day of the first global test flight arrived, and the world's eyes were trained on the Project Skygreen team. Evan stood at the edge of the runway, his heart pounding as he watched the massive aircraft being prepped for launch. The sleek, aerodynamic design of the hybrid solar wind-powered plane glistened in the early morning sun. It was the culmination of years of hard work, sleepless nights, and endless iterations. The plane was equipped with the most advanced solar cells ever created, capable of capturing and storing enough energy to power the aircraft for long-haul flights. The wings were designed to maximize wind efficiency, ensuring that it could glide effortlessly through the skies even during the night when the sun's energy wasn't available. This was no longer just an experiment. It was a revolutionary step towards transforming the aviation industry forever. Despite the overwhelming sense of excitement, Evan felt a knot in his stomach. This was the moment that would either validate everything he had worked for or prove the skeptics right. As the plane's engines began to hum and the countdown to launch began, Evan's mind raced. What if it doesn't work? What if there's a malfunction? What if the world sees this as a failure? But then, he remembered what Elon had said. Failure is part of the process. If this test flight didn't go as planned, it wouldn't be the end. It would be the beginning of figuring out what needed to be improved. Still, the pressure weighed on him. "Ready, Evan?" Musk's voice cut through the tension. He stood beside Evan, his eyes bright with excitement. Evan took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's do this." As the plane started its slow roll down the runway, the crowd held their breath. Evan, Elon, and the rest of the team stood in near silence, watching the plane gain speed. The sound of the engines, combined with the roar of the wind, filled the air. The plane reached the end of the runway, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it seemed like it wasn't going to lift off. The massive machine wavered, teetering just above the ground. Evan's heart skipped a beat, his eyes fixed on the aircraft. But then, the plane surged upwards, lifting off with incredible grace. A cheer erupted from the crowd, but Evan didn't join in. His focus was on the plane as it soared into the sky. The hybrid energy system was working perfectly, the solar cells collecting energy, and the wind turbines adding a boost to the plane's ascent. It was working. It was really working. For the first few hours, everything seemed to go flawlessly. The plane reached cruising altitude, and Evan watched from the ground as it glided smoothly across the sky, powered by the energy it had harvested. There were moments when the wind turbines whirred to life, kicking in a burst of speed as the sun beat down on the solar panels, charging the batteries. But as the plane continued on its flight path, things started to get more complicated. The energy levels began to fluctuate as the weather conditions changed. The plane's power systems were designed to adapt to such fluctuations, but Evan couldn't help but worry. At the control station, engineers monitored the plane's performance closely. There were a few minor hiccups, small adjustments to the throttle, and a brief moment when the plane's altitude dropped slightly, but each time, the plane adapted. The hybrid system worked. It was handling the environment far better than expected, but this was only the beginning. The real test would come as the plane approached the halfway point of its journey. At the halfway mark, a problem arose. The energy reserves had started to dip lower than anticipated, and the plane was heading into a region of clouds, where the sun wouldn't provide enough solar power to recharge its batteries. The wind turbines, though helpful, couldn't generate enough power on their own to compensate. Evan was in the control room, his pulse racing. He and the team had prepared for this scenario, but it was still nerve-wracking. The plane's batteries were running low, and if they didn't find a solution soon, they could face an emergency landing. Elon had already put in place a contingency plan, but Evan felt the weight of the decision. This could be the moment that made or broke everything. The world was watching, and every decision would matter. With only minutes to spare, Evan's mind raced. He reviewed the systems on his tablet, trying to come up with a solution that would keep the plane in the air just a little longer. Then it hit him. What if we redirect more power from the auxiliary systems into the engines? Evan muttered to himself, flipping through the control panels. He quickly proposed the idea to Musk, who was in constant contact with the team. The plan was simple: redirect non-essential power from the plane's onboard systems and focus everything on maintaining the plane's momentum. They would need to fly at a slightly lower speed to conserve energy, but it was worth a shot. "Do it," Musk said with his usual confidence. Evan's fingers flew across the controls, adjusting the settings as quickly as possible. The plane's energy systems rebalanced, and within seconds, the power levels began to stabilize. Slowly, the plane regained altitude, and the once plummeting energy reserves began to climb again. It worked. For the next few hours, Evan and the team worked with precision, making continuous adjustments as the plane flew through increasingly challenging weather. The hybrid system held up, the turbines buzzing with every gust of wind, and the solar panels charging the batteries whenever the clouds parted. As the plane reached its final destination, an international airport, Evan couldn't help but feel a wave of relief. The plane touched down smoothly, its tires skimming the runway before coming to a full stop. The moment the plane came to a halt, the crowd erupted in applause. It wasn't just the engineers and the scientists who celebrated. It was the world. People from all walks of life had gathered to witness this historic moment. This wasn't just the success of one person. It was a victory for innovation, sustainability, and the future of travel. Evan stood on the runway, his heart still pounding in his chest. He looked around at the cheering crowd, at the flashing cameras, and at Elon, who was smiling broadly. It had worked. It had actually worked. Musk walked over to him, clapping him on the back. "You did it, Evan. You proved them wrong." Evan smiled, his exhaustion mixing with a deep sense of pride. "We did it, Elon. We really did it." The following days were a blur of interviews, meetings, and celebrations. The success of the first global test flight was all over the news. People who had once doubted the viability of hybrid solar wind-powered aviation were now asking how quickly they could adopt the technology. And Evan? He was no longer just a boy with a dream. He was the face of a new era in aviation, a symbol of how far innovation could take humanity when people dared to push the limits. The successful global test flight of Project Skygreen sent shockwaves through the aviation industry, but the real impact went far beyond just a technological breakthrough. The moment Evan's plane touched down, the world had changed. News outlets, scientists, environmentalists, and even major airlines were abuzz with the possibilities of a future where air travel didn't rely on fossil fuels. Within days of the successful test flight, Evan Roberts became a household name. His story was plastered across every major news platform, and his achievement was celebrated not only for its innovation but for its boldness. The 10-year-old prodigy who had built a solar-powered airplane had now captured the attention of world leaders and industry giants. The phone rang off the hook at Evan's home. Companies, government representatives, and research institutions all wanted to meet with him. They wanted to discuss the future of air travel, environmental sustainability, and the potential for collaboration. But while the excitement was palpable, so too was the pressure. "Evan, we're being contacted by everyone," Karen said, looking at her son who was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork, letters, and emails. "This is bigger than we imagined. We need to be careful." Evan, still processing the enormity of what had just happened, nodded. "I know, Mom, but this is just the beginning. We can't stop now. We have to keep pushing forward." It was clear to him that the real work was only just beginning. The plane was a breakthrough, yes, but the world had high expectations now. The pressure was enormous, and the stakes were even higher. The day after the flight, Elon Musk invited Evan to his office at SpaceX for a one-on-one meeting. The headquarters, as usual, buzzed with energy, the walls lined with blueprints of rockets, electric cars, and advanced energy systems. Musk was in his usual mode, calm, strategic, and focused. "Elon," Evan said as they sat down across from each other, "what do we do next? How do we take this to the next level?" Musk leaned forward, his eyes intense but filled with a deep understanding. "Evan, what you've done here is monumental, but we can't let this be a one-off. The world needs a scalable solution. We need to take Project Skygreen beyond just a test flight. We need to prove that this technology can handle the demands of commercial aviation, and we need to make it available on a global scale." Evan listened carefully, his mind racing. The enormity of Musk's words sunk in. He wasn't just making a plane anymore. He was trying to reshape the entire aviation industry. "I've been working on something," Musk continued. "I think it's time we brought in the big players, airlines, governments, regulatory bodies, everyone who has the power to make this happen. But we'll need their full commitment. You'll need to present the next phase of the project, and it'll need to be more than just theoretical. You're going to need real-world data." Evan took a deep breath. "And how do we do that?" Musk smiled. "You'll need to partner with some of the world's biggest airlines. We're going to launch a series of test flights across international routes. These flights will be crucial for proving the technology's scalability. And you, Evan, will be the face of this revolution. It wasn't long before Evan and the Sky Green team began meeting with major airline executives. The industry had been skeptical about anything that seemed too futuristic, especially anything that challenged the current aviation status quo. At one meeting, Evan sat across from Henry Williams, the CEO of one of the largest airlines in North America. Williams, a tall, imposing figure, studied the plans in front of him. His glasses perched low on his nose as he scanned the figures with a furrowed brow. "I'm not convinced," Williams said bluntly, folding his arms. "You're telling me we can take a plane that uses hybrid solar wind power and replace our current fleet? That's a huge leap. The logistics, the infrastructure, the safety concerns, all of that still needs to be addressed. And the costs, Evan, this doesn't come cheap." Evan wasn't fazed. He had seen this kind of skepticism before. With a steady voice, he responded, "I understand your concerns, Mr. Williams, but look at the numbers. Traditional aviation relies on oil, which is only getting more expensive and less sustainable. The future of aviation is clean, renewable energy. And the technology we've developed isn't just a theory anymore. It's proven. If we want to future-proof the industry, we have to start somewhere." Musk, who was sitting beside Evan, chimed in, "You don't just get to be a leader in the industry by sticking to the old ways. We need bold solutions. We need to change the game. And with the right partnerships, we can bring this to scale." Williams stared at the two of them for a long moment. Finally, he sighed, putting the paperwork down. "I'm not saying yes yet, but I'm willing to test it. Let's do some small-scale trials. Let's see how it performs on smaller routes before we commit to a full-scale transformation." It wasn't a full endorsement, but it was a start. Over the next few months, Sky Green began testing its hybrid planes on smaller regional routes. The results were promising. Every flight, while not flawless, demonstrated significant potential. Passengers loved the idea of flying in a more sustainable, eco-friendly way, and the media continued to cover the project's progress with increasing enthusiasm. Airlines were starting to take notice. Despite the early-stage challenges, the success of these trial flights built momentum. Airlines began announcing plans to integrate solar-powered aircraft into their fleets, setting ambitious goals for the future. Meanwhile, governments around the world, eager to meet their climate goals, offered funding and support for clean aviation technologies. Research institutions reached out to collaborate on refining the solar and wind technologies, looking for ways to increase efficiency and make the systems even more sustainable. The world was slowly but surely beginning to pivot. As Project Sky Green gained more recognition, the conversations around environmentally friendly aviation began to shift. Evan's project was no longer a fringe experiment. It had become a mainstream solution. Environmental organizations that had previously been skeptical now hailed the project as a step in the right direction. Governments, too, began to incentivize the development of sustainable aviation technologies, offering grants and tax breaks to companies willing to explore cleaner, greener alternatives. Even the oil and gas industry started to take notice. While it was reluctant to give up its grip on the global aviation market, they knew change was coming. Some companies, sensing the inevitability of a future with less reliance on fossil fuels, began exploring ways to diversify into renewable energy. At the heart of all of this, Evan remained focused on one goal: to build a better, cleaner future. He was no longer just a young inventor. He had become a leader in a movement that would forever change the way humanity traveled. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was the potential for success. One day, as Evan stood on the balcony of his home, looking out at the horizon, he received a message from Elon Musk. "You've done it, Evan. The world is watching, and the future is yours to shape. But remember, this is just the beginning. The rail revolution comes next." Evan smiled, the weight of Musk's words settling in. This wasn't just about planes. This wasn't just about solar and wind power. This was about rethinking everything, about reshaping the future of travel and sustainability on a global scale. As the months rolled by, Evan found himself at the center of an increasingly intense spotlight. The success of Project Sky Green had sparked a revolution in the aviation world, and now the world was watching, closely, anxiously, and with increasing expectation. It wasn't just about the hybrid planes anymore. It was about the very future of travel, and Evan was carrying that burden. His phone rang constantly. Invitations to international conferences, partnerships with massive corporations, government meetings, all of it was coming at him fast. The pressure was mounting. The boy who had once worked in his small garage with little more than a dream was now the face of an industry that was determined to change the world. But no one seemed to care about how young he was, or how much he still had to learn. They saw a visionary, a game changer. And with that title came the weight of the world's expectations. Evan was no stranger to challenges, but the weight of fame was new to him. The first few interviews had been exciting. Getting to share his vision with the world felt like a dream come true. But as the months passed, he realized that being in the public meant constantly fighting to prove yourself. On a particularly exhausting afternoon, after an interview with a major news outlet, Evan walked into his kitchen, feeling the familiar weight of stress settling on his shoulders. Karen, his mother, was sitting at the table, reading through some research papers. She looked up when he entered, immediately noticing the exhaustion in his eyes. "Evan, you okay?" she asked softly. Evan ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Mom. Everything's moving so fast. One minute, I'm working on planes in the garage, and the next, I'm standing in front of politicians, CEOs, and world leaders, telling them about the future of aviation. It's a lot. Sometimes I wish it could slow down a bit." Karen smiled and placed a hand on his. "I know it's overwhelming, honey, but you've got something amazing here. Just remember, you're doing this for the right reasons. And you've got people who believe in you. We all believe in you." Evan nodded, grateful for his mother's steady presence. But the doubt in his mind lingered. As the project continued to gain momentum, there came a point when the cracks started to show. A significant setback hit when one of the test flights, a long-haul journey between two major cities, encountered a major issue mid-flight. The SolarWind hybrid plane had experienced a malfunction in its energy storage system. Although the plane safely landed, it was clear that the technology wasn't quite as foolproof as it had seemed. Evan stared at the reports on his tablet, his heart sinking as he read through the details of the malfunction. The entire team had worked so hard, and to see this setback felt like a punch to the gut. The press jumped on the failure quickly, of course. The headlines screamed about the plane's technical difficulties, questioning whether the dream of solar-powered aviation could ever become a reality. "Skygreen plane fails mid-flight," read one headline. "Evan's vision crashes down to Earth," read another. Evan felt the weight of the failure like a heavy weight in his chest. It wasn't just about the technology, it was about the reputation he'd built. Was it all coming undone? That evening, after the press had finally quieted, Evan was sitting in his room, scrolling through social media. The comments ranged from skeptical to downright cruel. He felt completely overwhelmed. He needed guidance. Elon had been in his life for a while now, and though Evan often felt like an equal partner in their conversations, he knew that Musk had faced his own battles, both public and private. So, Evan picked up the phone and dialed Elon's number. "Evan," Elon answered cheerfully. "How are you, my friend?" Evan took a deep breath. "I don't know how to say this, Elon, but we've hit a huge roadblock. One of our planes had a major malfunction mid-flight. The press is ripping us apart. I don't know what to do. I thought we were ready for the world." There was a long pause before Elon spoke again, his tone thoughtful. "Evan, let me ask you something. What makes a true innovator?" Evan hesitated. "I guess, someone who can keep going despite the obstacles?" "Exactly," Elon said. "There's a reason why I keep pushing, even when things go wrong. The people who are truly changing the world don't do it without setbacks. They do it because of them. The road to success is littered with failures. But it's not the failures that define us, it's how we rise from them." Evan felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he listened to Elon's words. It wasn't about perfection. It was about perseverance. "Elon," Evan said, his voice firmer now, "I'm not giving up. We're going to figure this out. We have to. For everyone who believes in this." Elon laughed. "That's the spirit. You're not alone in this. And remember, this is just the beginning. Keep pushing." The next day, Evan called an emergency meeting with his team. They were all shaken by the failure, but Evan was determined to turn things around. "We've hit a bump in the road," Evan said, addressing the group. But that's all this is, a bump. We knew this was going to be difficult, but we can't let this define us. We'll find the issue, fix it, and come back stronger. We've done it before, and we'll do it again. The team, though tired and frustrated, rallied around him. Together, they started dissecting the data from the flight, going over every detail. It wasn't easy, but the problem was identified. A minor flaw in the energy storage system had caused the plane to miscalculate its power usage, which led to the malfunction. Over the next few weeks, the team worked tirelessly, refining the systems and improving the technology. They made adjustments to the energy storage system, ensuring that the planes would have enough backup power to handle unexpected issues. It was a tedious process, but each small success brought them closer to their goal. Weeks turned into months, and the team worked around the clock. Finally, after countless tests, the improvements were ready. It was time for the next big flight test. Evan stood once again on the tarmac, watching as the new and improved sky green aircraft was prepared for its test flight. He was nervous, but also filled with a sense of determination. This was the moment to prove that failure wasn't the end. It was a lesson, a stepping stone. The plane took off flawlessly. The energy systems worked perfectly, the solar cells and wind turbines meshing seamlessly to power the aircraft. The flight lasted for hours, with real-time data flowing back to the team on the ground. Everything went smoothly, and by the time the plane touched down, the entire team was celebrating. It was a victory, not just for the technology, but for resilience. Later that evening, after the celebrations had died down, Evan stood alone on the balcony, gazing at the horizon. He thought about everything that had brought him to this moment, the setbacks, the failures, the moments of doubt, and how they had all led to something greater. And then he received a message from Elon Musk. "You've done it, Evan. I knew you would. The world is watching now. Keep your focus and let nothing stop you. The revolution is just getting started." Evan smiled to himself, the weight of the past few months lifting. He knew that the road ahead would still be challenging, but now he felt ready. This was the path he had chosen, and no matter how many obstacles came his way, he was determined to keep going. The future of aviation was in his hands. The success of the second test flight was not just a technical victory for Project Skygreen. It was a public triumph. News outlets, environmental organizations, and tech enthusiasts alike hailed Evan's innovation as a defining moment in the quest for sustainable aviation. The plane had worked flawlessly, and the world was beginning to see what was possible. But as Evan and his team basked in the glow of their victory, a new challenge emerged. The future of the industry depended on how quickly they could scale the technology. The week following the successful flight was a blur of interviews, meetings, and press conferences. Evan had become a global sensation. He was invited to appear on major news networks, podcasts, and even sat down with a few of the world's most influential CEOs. His young age was no longer seen as a novelty, it was a symbol of the future. During one particularly surreal moment, Evan was featured in a live-streamed conversation with Bill Gates, who praised his ingenuity and spoke about the importance of green technologies. The media frenzy had made Evan a role model for young people everywhere, especially those with a passion for technology and sustainability. In one of the interviews, Evan was asked, "What does it feel like to change the world at just 10 years old?" Evan, ever humble, smiled shyly. "It's overwhelming, honestly, but I'm just doing what I love. And if it can help make the world a better place, then that's the best feeling in the world." The impact on social media was equally massive. Hashtags like #SkyGreen, #NextGenAviation, and #YoungInventor trended globally. Thousands of messages poured in from students, engineers, and environmental advocates, all congratulating him and offering support. But amidst all the praise, Evan couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was just beginning. The technology had worked, yes, but would it be scalable? Could it be commercialized quickly enough to make a real impact on the planet? The clock was ticking, and the stakes had never been higher. Evan, now more focused than ever, called for a meeting with his core team. They gathered in a conference room at Skygreen's headquarters, which had grown considerably since the early days in his garage. The team had been working tirelessly, refining the technology, gathering data, and strategizing the next phase. But Evan knew that scaling was a whole different ball game. "I've been thinking," Evan said, pacing the room. "We've proven that the technology works. But now, we need to prove that it can handle the volume. We need to get these planes into commercial fleets, and we need to do it quickly." Sarah, the head engineer, nodded. "Scaling up will require a lot more resources. We'll need to manufacture at a much larger scale. And not just the planes, we need to build infrastructure. Solar farms, wind farms, and energy storage systems to support the fleet. This can't be done in isolation." Evan stopped pacing and turned to face his team. "Right. We need to bring in partners, big companies that already have the resources, the supply chains, and the infrastructure to help us expand. And not just any companies. We need those who care about sustainability, who understand that this is about changing the future, not just making money." The team agreed. The next step was clear. They would need to form strategic alliances with major corporations and governments. They had to make the case that solar-powered aviation wasn't just an idealistic dream. It was the next step in the evolution of the industry. The first major hurdle was approaching the airline giants. As much as they had supported SkyGreen's initial trials, convincing them to invest in large-scale implementation was another matter entirely. Many of the airlines were still tied to fossil fuels, heavily invested in their current fleet, and wary of making such a significant shift. It was a tough sell, but Evan was undeterred. Through a series of high-level meetings, SkyGreen managed to form a partnership with Air Future, a forward-thinking airline known for its commitment to reducing carbon emissions. The partnership would focus on introducing a fleet of hybrid solar-powered planes on short and medium-haul routes. The airline would invest heavily in the technology, while SkyGreen would continue to develop and supply the planes. "We need to prove that this is feasible on a larger scale," said the CEO of Air Future, Graham Wells, at their first joint press conference. "We're excited to be part of this revolution, and we're putting our money where our mouth is. The world needs this." It wasn't just Air Future that signed on. In the months that followed, several other major airlines also committed to integrating solar-powered planes into their fleets, although they remained cautious, signing smaller pilot programs before scaling up. But every partnership was another step toward global transformation. As SkyGreen gained credibility and momentum, the movement towards sustainable aviation spread far beyond the corporate world. Governments, especially in Europe and North America, began passing legislation that supported green technologies, offering tax incentives and research grants for innovations like solar-powered planes. Cities around the world started exploring electric airports, where planes could recharge between flights, and new energy grids powered by renewable sources began to take shape. Evan's vision was beginning to take root everywhere, from small towns looking for clean energy solutions to global corporations that saw sustainability as the key to future growth. But the journey wasn't without obstacles. As SkyGreen expanded, new challenges arose. There were issues with production timelines, unforeseen technical complications, and constant pressure from the media and investors. Evan had learned early on that progress and innovation often felt like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But that didn't stop him. With each setback, he gathered more data, fine-tuned the technology, and kept pushing forward. 1 year after the initial test flight, SkyGreen completed its first commercial flight using a fully solar-powered aircraft. The flight, operated by Air Future, flew a full passenger load from New York City to Toronto, a distance of over 400 miles. The plane used a combination of solar power and backup energy storage, and the flight was hailed as a historic achievement. The event was covered live on TV and by news outlets worldwide. The story was no longer just about a boy and his plane. It was about a new era of aviation, where environmental sustainability was no longer a luxury but a necessity. As Evan stood on the tarmac watching the plane take off, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come. It had started as a dream in his garage, and now he was part of a movement that was changing the world. And as always, he had Elon Musk to thank for helping him keep going. Just then, Evan's phone buzzed with a new message from Elon. "Congratulations, Evan. You've proven what I've always known. Innovation comes from those who dare to think differently. Keep pushing. The world needs more dreamers like you." Evan smiled, the weight of everything he had accomplished settling in. He wasn't just a 10-year-old boy anymore. He was an inventor, a visionary, and above all, a changemaker. The success of SkyGreen's commercial flights marked a pivotal moment in the journey towards sustainable aviation. However, Evan and his team soon realized that success was no longer measured just by the number of flights or partnerships. Now, it was about pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The world's eyes were on them, and every new milestone was another test of their resolve. SkyGreen's partnership with Air Future was a success, but it wasn't enough. In the months that followed the historic flight, demand for solar-powered planes skyrocketed. Airlines, cities, and governments around the world began to place orders. But with great demand came greater challenges. Scaling up mass production of the solar-powered planes was more complicated than Evan had anticipated. The supply chain that had worked for prototypes was no longer viable for mass production. The materials for the solar cells and energy storage systems were scarce, and even though they had agreements in place with top manufacturers, the timelines began to stretch. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah, SkyGreen's lead engineer, pulled Evan aside one afternoon. "We've hit a wall, Evan," Sarah said, her voice tense. "We can't keep up with the production demand for the solar panels. The materials needed to produce them are in short supply, and the cost is rising faster than we can keep track." Evan leaned against the workbench, thinking hard. This was the moment where most innovators faced their greatest challenge. It wasn't about the technology anymore. It was about the logistics, the ability to keep up with demand while maintaining quality. "We need to scale up sustainability at every level," Evan said quietly. "If we can't get the materials we need, we have to find a way to create them ourselves. Let's look into expanding our research and investing in new manufacturing processes." Sarah nodded. "It's risky, but we don't have a choice." The pressure was mounting, and Evan knew that they couldn't solve this alone. As much as he hated to admit it, he needed guidance. Elon had always been there for him, and this was no exception. Late one evening, after hours of analyzing data and taking calls with suppliers, Evan sat down in front of his laptop and sent Elon a message. "We've hit a roadblock. The demand for our planes is huge, but we can't get the materials we need to produce them. Any advice?" Elon's reply came swiftly, as usual. "I've been through this before, Evan. The key to solving this is finding new, innovative ways to source materials. Don't wait for others to change the supply chain for you. Change it yourself. It's all about vertical integration. Start looking into alternative materials or partnerships with mining companies that specialize in rare earth elements. But also, don't be afraid to disrupt the industry in ways people haven't thought of yet." Evan felt a spark of inspiration. The solution wasn't just about waiting for the right materials. It was about creating them from the ground up. And if anyone could disrupt the traditional supply chains, it was SkyGreen. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Evan and his team started looking into alternative materials for the solar panels, specifically materials that were both more abundant and cheaper to produce. They partnered with mining companies that specialized in rare earth elements, which were crucial for the creation of efficient solar cells. But they also looked into new technologies, such as recyclable materials, that could be used to build both the planes and the supporting infrastructure. Meanwhile, they began to explore vertical integration, building their own manufacturing facilities that could produce not only the solar panels but the planes as well. It was an ambitious plan, one that would require huge investments, new technologies, and rapid scaling. But Evan was determined to make it work. As SkyGreen worked tirelessly on its new supply chain, the next big moment came with the Global Green Innovation Summit. This was the place where industry leaders, tech giants, and innovators from around the world gathered to showcase their work. The theme for this year's summit was Changing the Future of Transportation. Evan had been invited as a keynote speaker, a recognition that he hadn't quite gotten used to. He stood backstage, watching as the other speakers delivered their presentations. Most of them were CEOs, seasoned experts with decades of experience. But Evan knew that he had something unique to offer. His story was about innovation, not just the technology itself, but the courage to push boundaries and dream bigger. When his time came, Evan walked confidently onto the stage, his heart pounding but his mind clear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we're on the brink of a revolution in transportation. The question isn't whether we can change the world, it's how quickly we can do it. For years, we've been told that sustainable aviation is just a dream. I'm here to tell you that dream is now a reality. The audience listened intently as Evan shared the story of Skygreen, from the early days of building the first solar-powered plane to the partnerships and obstacles they had faced along the way. He spoke not only about the successes but also about the setbacks and how they were using those failures to fuel innovation. "We're not just building airplanes," Evan said, his voice firm. "We're building a new world, one where clean energy is at the heart of everything we do. And if we're going to succeed, we need to work together. This is about more than just Skygreen. This is about all of us. The future is now. Let's make it happen." The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time, Evan felt the full weight of the movement he had sparked. He wasn't just a kid with a dream anymore. He was the leader of a global revolution. Months later, the first full fleet of Skygreen solar-powered planes took off, not just as a symbol of hope, but as a tangible reality. They were flying commercial routes, moving passengers between cities in a way that had never been possible before. The planes were sleek, efficient, and fully powered by renewable energy, proving that sustainability and profitability could go hand in hand. But the work didn't stop there. Skygreen continued to evolve, developing newer models with even greater efficiency and exploring new avenues for energy production, from solar highways to wind-powered hubs. The dream that had started in Evan's garage had now become a global initiative, touching lives across the world. Evan sat at his desk one evening, looking at a photo on his wall, a picture of the first Skygreen aircraft, taken during its maiden flight. It had been an incredible journey, but he knew the path ahead was still filled with challenges. Yet, he was more confident than ever. Looking out of his office window, he saw the world through different eyes. The sky was no longer the limit. He had proved that, at just 10 years old, it was possible to dream big and make those dreams come true. The future, he realized, was filled with endless possibilities, and he was just getting started. With Skygreen's planes now flying across major commercial routes and receiving recognition on the global stage, Evan's impact on the aviation world was undeniable. But as the sky became less of a boundary, Evan began to look beyond Earth's atmosphere. The success of solar-powered aviation had proved one thing: nothing was impossible. So why not take it further? Why not push the limits of what could be achieved with renewable energy in space? Evan had always been fascinated by space. As a child, he had devoured books about astronauts, space exploration, and the incredible technologies that powered spacecraft. He had watched rockets launch with the same awe and wonder that most children reserve for superheroes. But now, as a 10-year-old who had already disrupted an entire industry, he was thinking about a new frontier: sustainable space travel. It started as a casual conversation during a team brainstorming session at Skygreen's headquarters. They were celebrating their recent accomplishments when Evan threw out an idea that took everyone by surprise. "I've been thinking," Evan said, sitting back in his chair, "what if we took what we're doing with solar-powered planes and brought it to space?" The room fell silent. Evan's team had gotten used to his big ideas, but this one was different. Space? Aviation was one thing, but space travel was a whole new level. "We've already proven that solar energy can power a plane," Evan continued. "Why not expand that to orbital travel? What if we could develop a solar-powered spacecraft that could be used to transport people and goods to the International Space Station, or even to the moon? Imagine the possibilities for sustainable space exploration." Sarah, the lead engineer, blinked and looked at Evan, half in disbelief and half in awe. "Are you saying we could build a solar-powered spacecraft? You realize how complicated that is, right?" Evan smiled. "I know. But if we can power an airplane, surely we can figure out how to power something that's going to space. And if we could make it sustainable, no fossil fuels, imagine what that could mean for the future of space exploration." The idea was radical, but Evan's mind never stopped thinking big. Within days, Skygreen began drawing up blueprints for a solar-powered spacecraft. They started assembling a team of experts, including aerospace engineers, energy specialists, and scientists with experience in space technologies. Evan's goal was to create a hybrid spacecraft, one that used solar energy for propulsion, along with energy storage systems that could sustain long missions. But Evan knew that to make this dream a reality, he needed more than just technical expertise. He needed industry buy-in, and that meant talking to the right people. The first call was to NASA. Despite his youth, Evan had built a reputation as someone who was serious and visionary. His proposal wasn't just about creating a cool new spacecraft. It was about transforming the future of space exploration by making it environmentally sustainable. Evan's team put together a presentation highlighting SkyGreen's accomplishments in the aviation world, showing how they had already disrupted the traditional approach to air travel. Then they laid out their vision for space, with a compelling argument that sustainable space travel was not only possible but imperative. After several weeks of back-and-forth communications, the invitation came. Evan and his team were invited to present their proposal in person at NASA's headquarters in Washington, D.C. The day of the meeting arrived, and Evan was both nervous and excited. As he walked through the historic halls of NASA's headquarters, he felt the weight of the moment. This was the heart of American space exploration, the agency responsible for putting a man on the moon and sending rovers to Mars. And now, Evan was here, pitching an idea that could change everything. Inside a large conference room, NASA engineers, scientists, and administrators sat around a polished wooden table, listening intently as Evan presented his proposal. The room was filled with skeptics. After all, solar-powered planes and rockets had never been proven at this scale. "We believe we're on the cusp of a new era in space exploration," Evan said, his voice steady. "By using solar energy for propulsion, we could eliminate the need for fossil fuels and dramatically reduce the carbon footprint of space travel. We're not just talking about sending cargo into space, we're talking about human missions." He detailed the concept of a solar-powered spacecraft that could be used for missions to the International Space Station, ISS, for commercial space tourism, and for potential lunar missions. He spoke about the challenges, of course, the need for advanced solar panels that could withstand space conditions, the power-to-weight ratio required for flight in the vacuum of space, and the massive energy storage systems needed for longer missions. But Evan didn't just stop at problems. He also laid out solutions. SkyGreen had already proven that solar technology could be integrated into large-scale transportation. Now, they were looking to build a spacecraft that could leverage those lessons learned and adapt them for space. There was a long pause after Evan finished his presentation. The room was quiet, and for a moment, he wondered if he had gone too far, even for someone with his ambition. Then, Dr. Maria Evans, a prominent NASA astronaut and scientist, spoke. "I have to admit," she began, "I've been skeptical about the viability of solar-powered space travel. But after hearing this proposal, I can see the potential. The idea of eliminating the need for rocket fuels, that's a game changer. And the environmental impact of space missions is something we've overlooked for too long. I think we have to take this seriously." Evan couldn't believe it. The room was warming to the idea. Several other NASA officials nodded in agreement. "We're interested in exploring this further," one of them said. "Let's see what we can do to support this project." In the weeks that followed, SkyGreen entered into discussions with NASA, exploring the potential for collaborative research and funding. NASA agreed to fund a feasibility study into solar-powered spacecraft technology, and SkyGreen would provide the technical expertise. They would work together to create a prototype spacecraft that could eventually be tested in Earth's orbit. This was the beginning of what could become the next big leap for space exploration, a leap that was not just about technology, but about sustainability. Evan knew this was just the beginning. The next frontier was waiting, and this new project would not only change the way humanity traveled in space, but it could also reshape the future of the planet itself. As SkyGreen's groundbreaking partnership with NASA progressed, Evan found himself in a whirlwind of meetings, blueprints, and design prototypes. The collaboration with NASA was moving forward faster than anyone had anticipated, and the dream of solar-powered space travel was becoming more and more tangible. Evan, once just a curious 10-year-old tinkering with solar panels in his garage, was now at the forefront of a revolution in space exploration. His vision was taking shape, but with this new level of success came an even greater responsibility. The design for the first-ever solar-powered spacecraft was nothing like anything that had been built before. Evan, Sarah, and the team at SkyGreen had to innovate from the ground up. The spacecraft needed to be lightweight enough to take off with the limited thrust of solar propulsion, but also durable enough to withstand the harsh conditions of space. The solar panels had to be more efficient than anything used before, and the spacecraft's energy storage had to be nearly perfect in order to sustain long missions. Working with NASA's engineers, Skygreen's team quickly realized that this project wasn't just about scaling up solar technology. It was about reimagining how we travel beyond Earth. The challenges were immense, but so were the rewards. If they could make this spacecraft work, it wouldn't just change space exploration. It would change humanity's relationship with the universe. After months of testing and research, the team finally made a breakthrough. The new solar cells they were developing were more efficient than expected, able to capture energy from the sun even in the harsh conditions of space. This new technology, combined with advanced ion thrusters powered by solar energy, meant that the spacecraft could travel through space for long periods of time without needing traditional rocket fuels. Evan could hardly believe it when Sarah called him into the lab to see the first full-scale prototype. It was sleek, almost futuristic in its design, and its wings were lined with high-efficiency solar panels. The spacecraft looked ready for launch. "We did it," Sarah said, her eyes shining with excitement. "It's everything we hoped for." Evan stood silently for a moment, taking in the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. For a decade, he had been working on this dream, and now it was within reach. "This is only the beginning," Evan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've proven that solar-powered space travel is possible. But what we do next is going to change everything." The day of the launch was one of the most anticipated moments in the history of space exploration. The media buzzed with excitement, and around the world, people were watching. Skygreen, once a small company started by a 10-year-old boy, was now at the forefront of sustainable space travel. The spacecraft, named Solara I, was ready. The launch site was filled with engineers, scientists, and a crowd of eager onlookers. The countdown began. As the clock ticked down, Evan stood with Sarah, Elon Musk, and the team at NASA, watching from the control room. His heart was racing. This wasn't just about technology anymore. This was about humanity's future in space. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The rocket engines roared to life as Solara I began its ascent into the sky. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. Then, in an instant, the spacecraft shot upward, breaking through the atmosphere and heading toward space. The solar panels on the spacecraft began to capture energy as it ascended, and soon, Solara I was in orbit, gliding smoothly through the void of space. The successful launch of Solara I marked a new chapter in human exploration. The spacecraft, powered entirely by solar energy, orbited the Earth and conducted a series of scientific experiments to test the viability of long-term solar-powered missions. It demonstrated that sustainable space travel was not only possible, but could be scalable. As Solara I orbited the planet, Evan received messages from around the world. The media was going wild, but what struck him most was the outpouring of support from young people, the next generation of scientists, engineers, and dreamers. They were inspired. They saw that what he had done was possible for them, too. If a 10-year-old could change the world of aviation and space, then anything was possible. Elon Musk was among those who reached out. In his typical fashion, his message was brief but to the point. "Well done, Evan. The future is in good hands." With the success of Solara I, Skygreen didn't stop there. The team began working on new projects, including the development of a fleet of solar-powered spacecraft for commercial space travel. The goal was to create sustainable, affordable space tourism that could one day make space accessible to everyone. As Evan stood on the balcony of his headquarters, overlooking the bustling city, he reflected on how far he had come. From a boy with a dream in his garage to the leader of a space-age revolution, Evan had accomplished more than anyone thought possible. But he knew this was just the beginning. The universe was vast, and he had barely scratched the surface of what was out there. The Moon, Mars, and beyond were waiting. Humanity's journey into space had only just begun, and Evan was determined to lead the way. Years from now, people would look back on the solar revolution and say that it all started with a 10-year-old genius who built a solar-powered airplane and dared to dream beyond the stars. Evan wasn't just an inventor or an entrepreneur. He was a visionary who had redefined what was possible. And as he continued to push the boundaries of space travel, he inspired millions around the world to dream bigger, aim higher, and to never stop believing that the future could be green, sustainable, and limitless. As Evan stood on the observation deck of the Skygreen headquarters, looking up at the sky that he had transformed, He could hardly believe how much had changed in just a few years. The world around him was buzzing with excitement about the future of space travel, and for the first time, that future seemed sustainable. It was no longer just about reaching the stars. It was about reaching them in a way that would protect the planet and ensure the longevity of humanity. Evan's life had come full circle. From the young boy who had built a solar-powered airplane in his garage to the leader of a revolutionary company, SkyGreen now stood as a beacon of green technology in aviation and space exploration. They had not only changed the way we think about flight, but had redefined what is possible in space travel. The world was embracing the changes Evan had pioneered. SkyGreen's fleet of solar-powered airplanes now flew on commercial routes across the globe, reducing emissions and transforming the aviation industry. But it was the success of Solara I, the first solar-powered spacecraft, that truly set the world on fire. As the spacecraft completed its first successful mission to the International Space Station, the global community began to recognize the immense potential of solar energy in space. What once seemed like science fiction, sustainable, clean space travel, was now a reality. NASA, SpaceX, and other space agencies began collaborating with SkyGreen to further develop solar-powered space missions, from cargo delivery to crewed expeditions to the Moon and even Mars. Space tourism, once an elite activity reserved for the wealthy few, was now on the horizon for the masses, with plans for affordable solar-powered spacecraft that would take people on once-in-a-lifetime journeys beyond Earth. The future of space exploration was no longer dominated by fossil fuels or rocket exhaust. Instead, solar power had become the key to the next phase of human spaceflight, a phase that was clean, sustainable, and endless. As Evan reflected on everything he had accomplished, he couldn't help but think about the next generation. The young people who were just now starting to dream about their futures. Just as he had been inspired by the great minds of the past, now it was his turn to inspire. SkyGreen had started something much bigger than just a company. It had started a movement that would change the way the world thought about energy, about travel, about the future of our planet. And at the heart of that movement was a simple message: anything is possible. Evan, now just a few months shy of turning 14, stood before a crowd of thousands at the Global Innovation Summit in New York City. The crowd was filled with young innovators, engineers, and entrepreneurs from around the world, all there to celebrate progress, sustainability, and the future of technology. With his customary confidence, Evan took the stage. The lights dimmed, and the room fell silent as the young genius prepared to speak. But this time, his message wasn't just about solar-powered airplanes or spacecraft. It was about something even more important: the responsibility of those who came after him. "I stand before you today as someone who was once a kid with a dream," Evan began. "But it's not about me, it's about all of you. You are the future of this planet, of space, of humanity. What I did was just one step. Now, it's up to you to take it further." The audience listened, rapt, as Evan continued. "We've proven that the impossible is possible. We've shown that with passion, innovation, and hard work, we can change the world. But now, we have to think bigger. We have to ask ourselves, what's next?" The crowd erupted into applause as Evan finished his speech. It wasn't just his success they were celebrating. It was the idea that anyone, no matter how young or small, could make a monumental difference. And so, Evan passed the torch to the next generation. He knew that he wasn't the last visionary to walk this path. There were millions of others out there, waiting to follow in his footsteps and take humanity's quest for a sustainable future even further. SkyGreen wasn't just a company anymore. It had become a symbol of what could be accomplished when we dared to imagine a better world. A world where we take care of our planet. A world where we use renewable resources to power our cities, our vehicles, and our space travel. And Evan knew that, in time, others would take these principles and build upon them, just as he had done. Looking up at the stars, Evan smiled. The world had come so far in such a short time, but the journey was far from over. With solar-powered space travel now a reality, humanity's next great challenge was not just about traveling to the Moon or Mars. It was about exploring the farthest reaches of the universe. In the distance, ships would one day travel to other star systems, powered by the same solar technology that had begun with Evan and SkyGreen. The solar revolution had sparked something much larger than just a technological shift. It had sparked a new era for humanity, one in which sustainability and exploration went hand in hand. As the first human missions to Mars were being planned and private space travel was becoming more common, Evan knew that the future held incredible possibilities. He didn't just change the world of aviation. He changed the way humanity would approach the final frontier. And as for Evan, he was just getting started. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?